Hello, my name is Ian, and today we're talking about Simon Bronner's Toward Definition of Folklore in Practice. Did you read it? Have you read this article? What did you think? You're probably thinking, I don't understand this. I am very scared. I have made a terrible decision to pursue folklore in my life. I want out now. That is probably to be expected. I have been doing this for 20 years. I've been a folklorist for 20 years. I have some kind of reputation locally, nationally, dare I even say internationally, as a folklorist and as someone who kind of understands a lot of things. And my reaction is, I don't understand this. I want to go away. I've made a terrible mistake. But I understand it a little bit. I have taught this a couple of times, at the very least, and I am still working my way through it. But one of the things to consider about academic writing in general is that it's not gospel. They are efforts at expressing an idea that the author is putting out into the world. It is a good idea in as much as it has passed muster and peer review. It is based on impeccable research. It is well written, and it is out there to be digested, to be struggled with, to be accepted, to be rejected, to be built upon, to have its holes patched, to take it, and maybe this is the answer that we have all been waiting for. So when you are reading anything, you shouldn't be taking it as I said, it's a gospel truth. It is not a perfect piece. It is a very good piece. I assign it precisely because it makes us work and makes us think about this thing. So what is the article about? Fundamentally, this is one of those articles where they're trying to make a statement. This is not descriptive, this is theoretical, and this is trying to basically say, I have an approach that will help guide the discipline a little bit. It's not an immodest statement. It's not braggadocio. It's just like, here is what has gone before, and if I might humbly suggest this approach that would help to direct some and address some of the ambiguities that previous approaches have taken. And one of the previous approaches is this classic definition that came out from Dan Benamos in the late 1960s. And it's kind of the definition that folklorists have been using almost ever since. It is artistic communication in small groups. And the wonderful thing about Benamos's definition is that it doesn't try and express the kind of stuff. It isn't a enumerative definition of folklore, nor does it associate it with this concept of tradition, which is problematic at best. And Bronner goes on to explain both the pros and the cons of that problematization. But if we just leave folklore as its traditional knowledge, then, well, traditional according to whom? According to the person or according to the folklorist? At which point we almost need to suggest that there is something objective that is tradition, and we the folklorist start cleaving areas of that person's understanding of their place within the structure of time into authentic or inauthentic. Oh, that isn't folklore, that is something else. It's like, but so it removes that partially. It removes that. Benamos's definition removes that. And Benamos was working at this definition, as Bronner talks about, within this context of trying to establish this as a discipline. We've already had, the better part of 150 some odd years, whether going by the name of folklore or popular antiquities before that, of this fascination with and the beginning of a science towards, or a scientific approach towards, this kind of realm of human activity, which seemed to have almost a common sense understanding of it. That, well, what are we looking at? I'm looking at folklore. Well, what is folklore? Well, folklore is folklore. Just that kind of thing. But it didn't have a disciplinary perspective. When you think about a discipline, one of the things that a discipline does is it typically has a sort of delimited field of inquiry in terms of these are the kind of things I ask questions about, and then a perspective, like these are the kind of questions I ask when I am asking questions, with the implicit about these sorts of things. And so, I mean, if we look at a discipline in terms of the kind of stuff it is, then you can see that folklore in that perspective, well, it's this body of traditional knowledge or whatever, and you have various people, anthropologists, English literature types, historians, oral historians, psychologists, and so on, who use this as data, that this is the stuff that they're asking questions. Now, they might be asking different questions about this kind of stuff, but they're all involved in it. And folklore was a multidisciplinary thing, even though the American Folklore Society was formed in the 1880s. For the vast wealth of its time, it shared meeting space. It literally alternated between meeting with the American Anthropological Association or the Modern Languages Association. So it was in this kind of neither nor. It wasn't its own thing. It was kind of the bastard stepchild of folklore and anthropology. And again, not discounting the fact that other people were also interested in it as the stuff. But when two things happened, when they started meeting on their own, it's like, no, we are asking questions that are neither this nor that, and we have our own field. And of course, these people are still welcome, but when you come to the American Folklore Society meeting, you are coming as a folklorist and not as a literary person or not as an anthropologist. It's like, okay, well, cool. What does that actually mean? And then you had the beginning of university departments. Indiana had been offering a degree in folklore, and an excellent degree in folklore, but with the idea that this is kind of this is the thing that you will be studying. So it was kind of almost like an inherently interdisciplinary approach, and this is the stuff. And then other places started offering programs in folklore. It's like, okay, well, this is a discipline, so presumably it has disciplinary questions. And all of this was happening within the baby boom generation. So all these graduate students were coming through. They had been benefiting from the explosion of understanding that happened with things like the GI Bill and going back to university and creating this really heady intellectual atmosphere, where they were, at the same time, that heady intellectual atmosphere was challenging these old established norms. So it's a kind of a generational conflict. This might be 50 or 60 years ago now, some of these questions, but they were these people like Ben Amos, like Roger Abrams, all these names that you're coming across as you read this, even like Alan Dundee's, they were late 20s, early 30s. They were not much older than you are now if you are an undergraduate student. And they were trying to grapple with these questions, and they were revolutionizing it for their own day. I am not interested in this old-timiness for its own sake. There is something dynamic that's happening here. And they go through a fair amount of interesting textbook definitions, and you can read the textbook definitions in the book, in the article. For example, Funk and Wagnall's dictionary, which is here. Voila. There's, if you look under folklore, the way they defined it, there's 21 different contributors who wrote definitions of what folklore is, and that came out in the mid-1950s. And so there was dissent, basically. And artistic communication in small groups emphasized the fact that this was not the thing. This was not an item-oriented discipline anymore. We had lifted our eyes from just simply the gathering of these artifacts, these mentefacts, these vestiges of the past that may be in some kind of continuity, but as again, we're almost thinking that we collect them today because they are the only evidence that we have for ephemeral type of performances of how they were in the past. But we're kind of like, again, past oriented, and we use or we gather to in a form of reconstruction to some kind of authentic form, to shifting towards performance, shifting towards the idea that no, these things are deliberately brought forward, independent of the folklorist, and they change and adapt, not because they are weakening in that chain of transmission, but because they are constantly being made new. They are constantly being made vital according to criteria that are important to the participants themselves. They are brought forward from the past. They are based in part on precedent, but they are something that is ongoingly made new. And so artistic communication in small groups was this, it is important that I share this thing with you. The small group is this vestige of interesting 1960s sociology, where the group was becoming the the object proper, and Alan Dundas's idea of the folk group as two or more people who share at least one common factor, which again is not defined by socioeconomic basis or ethnicity, but just simply shared by it's almost sort of statistical. They share this common factor, but that factor is something that is they find meaningful, and typically that factor is also something that they commune over. So you can talk about Elliot Oring has this great example of people with size 9 feet. They share that in common, but it's not particularly significant. And then when I teach Elliot Oring, I talk about how, well, yeah, but have you ever had a size 13 foot and then someone else with big feet? All of a sudden, you're like talking about big foot stuff, like where to get where to get shoes, the fact that they're never on sale, and sort of like the general carping, the problems of having big feet, and it becomes something that is more than merely statistical. It becomes something that is actually of a purpose. And the other thing is that they weren't really thinking at this time, but the cool thing about that, share at least one common factor and find it significant, and what qualifies and commune over it is the fact that also suggests the idea of folk groups and potency. The idea that they are two disparate people. They are not connected in space and time. They're not in face-to-face interaction. But that doesn't mean that in some time in the future they cannot potentially be in interaction. And that's actually going to have some really interesting resonances when we start talking about virtual communities and digital communities. Because even in Benamos's time, even though he was committed to the idea that mediation and media is one way that groups can get together, there's still like sort of default thinking about more or less in face-to-face communication. That small groups was kind of a bunch of people in a room doing something. Artistic is an interesting point because artistic was the idea, and again it's hinted in those notions of performance, that it draws attention to itself some way. That it is shaped, and it is shaped in a way that when we are doing it, we are aware that we are doing something. That we are aware that we are doing something that has some kind of significance and specialness about it, which is an interesting idea. And I think it's an important idea. I just think it can sort of be fuzzy. So it's not one of the problems that people had with this definition is that by using communication, it really is privileging forms that are expressly expressive, if you understand what I'm saying, but like song and story. And it doesn't really cover the area of folk life, where, well, what does it mean about like building a house? Is building a house a communication? And it is, if you sort of squint and look at it, and like, I know what they are talking about, but it's privileging one kind of thing, one kind of aspect of human interaction, and then sort of making an exceptional case for the other. It's like, well, barn is kind of like a story, but you kind of want a definition that actually fits barn and story, that doesn't have kinda thrown in there as some kind of qualifier. The other thing about artistic as a group is the idea of that sort of attracting attention to itself. So I'll let you do that part of the reading. It is interesting, and it's really cool to see the various definitions that have happened over time, but he is laying out an historical argument, so you should read it, and you should see the various nuances and the nature of the debate. This is, in many ways, this is kind of a classic idea of like the quaestio, in that he's laying out all these people say this, all these people say that, and here is some kind of synthesis. And he's doing it in two phases. He's basically suggesting that Dan Benamos's idea was already a synthesis of these sort of two item-oriented tradition, folk, and everything is sort of pure performance. But now he's saying that we've reached a different level. We've reached a different stage where really the shift online, the shift that much of our communication isn't done in face-to-face. Much of our communication isn't done homeostatically. If you don't know what the word homeostatic means, it basically means in real time. We think about a homeostatic performance, like film is a homeostatic performance. To engage in it, to watch an hour and a half film takes an hour and a half. A book is not. You can read fast or slow, but homeostatic is this idea of real time. And performances have that. Face-to-face performances have that idea that they are embedded in this. But that's not the case in much online communication. My best friends and I are on a Marco Polo thread, and we are engaged in conversations, but we're engaged in conversations where I speak into a camera. They see that, maybe they're watching it virtually live, but they see it and they wait for me to respond, and they respond. And sometimes it could be like half an hour later. It could be, I don't know. So it's stepped. It's not formalized. It is not rigid, but it is not in that interactive aspect. And that's one of the things about performance as a qualifier that is implicit in that Dan Benamos definition. Is that performance has to do with the idea that the thing is shaped in real time based on, fundamentally, on the reactions of the audience themselves, and that the audience is there and they are shaping it as we go. And so it's kind of this collaboration. When I sing a song, when I tell a story, when I interact with you, somehow you are, the very thing that I am doing is chosen in part because of you and because of the reaction that I'm hoping that it will garner. And your reaction, moreover, might actually alter the course of the performance. So even if it's a very one-sided collaboration, everything is fundamentally this collaboration. And at the very least, it has this intent. Computer, less so, in part because there is the possibility of, even though it is based in some kind of interaction, in some kind of I'm communicating to my group, it's kind of broadcast. It's like, I don't know who you are, but my people are out there, and I don't know when you'll be reading this. And I certainly know that I am putting this out almost as a unified whole, even if it's something as much as the anecdote that I am telling my friends over Marco Polo is a monologue to a camera, and then you might respond, but you are responding after the fact. And so it doesn't mean it's not informal. It doesn't mean that it is not highly structured. It doesn't mean that it is highly structured. It just means that it is structured in a different kind of way where the word performance doesn't quite fit the bill. In the same way that the word performance doesn't quite fit the bill when we're talking about a barn or a chair. Or something where, like, the maker makes something and puts it out into the world. Now, when the maker makes something and puts it out into the world, they do intend its use, but that doesn't necessarily, and so they are making it for that particular group, and that particular group is known to them. But the object itself will not necessarily be altered in the course of its being made by that outside group, and so it sort of seismic, it sort of changes that way. And it might be strange to compare a chair to online communication, but really it is like, I made this thing, it's out there. I made this thing, it's out there, as opposed to we're making this thing, I might be doing a lot of it, but you were helping, and back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And so it's different kind of communication. And of course, I mean, one of the things is it challenges that idea of tradition, because many of these things do not have precedent, because they are forms that can only exist in a virtual environment. So tradition starts to get wary, but tradition is actually ultimately an important factor in online, because we are doing this in part because it has been done before. You can see these chains of precedent, and you can see these chains of import, that people are doing it because it is important to their group that they do it this way. So he comes up with this definition, and let me just read it to you carefully, because it is, I think, important. So he's defining, his new definition for folklore is traditional knowledge put into and drawing from practice. He uses practice as opposed to performance, with the idea that performance is an opportunity for a kind of practice, but there are practices that do not exist in the performance face-to-face interaction kind of way, yet nevertheless intend that. And he brings the idea of tradition, and more importantly, traditional knowledge. This is a practice of understanding. The other thing about him reintroducing the word traditional, and not simply tradition, but traditional knowledge, is the idea that there is some kind of intent. Because when we go back to the folk, tradition is often a criterion that is being invoked. But again, it is their tradition. It is their understanding of tradition, and not the folklorists. Tradition is not some kind of authenticator, some kind of absolute thing that we can enumerate and objectify or categorize and cast in amber as the tradition, but rather this sense of continuity with the past, where the sense of continuity of the past is important to the practitioner themselves. And we use the word sort of practitioner as opposed to, tradition bearer in a way, because it is about action. It is about actual intent. He has this word Femic, which he gets. There's a lot of things that you can read here, and you can go back, read his sources, try and figure it out. There's a couple of pages towards the end where I'm just like, oh, mercy, no, please, no. I like the idea of Femic, if I understand it, because Femic, to me, encompasses that idea of artistic, without the cultural baggage that the word artistic might bring, and B, allowing it broad expanse for forms that are not particularly aesthetically minded. For me, artistic, the way I've always tried to define artistic in Dan Benamos' definition is this is something that could be done in a number of ways, but we do it in this way because it is important to us, or because there is this additional level of meaning that might be subtextual, that might be implicit, but that sort of connects it to something else. It is beyond the merely instrumental. It has some kind of purpose towards it that is about the connecting of my understanding of the world to your understanding of the world. In a way, that brings in this idea of tradition. That associates something. And he uses this distinction between phatic and phemic. And phatic is those things that are, word forms that are expressive, because they are about the building of community than they are necessarily inquiries. Like, hello, how's your day going? What's up? What's new? These are things that you will say to someone literally as you are passing a stranger in the street. If you are in a small town in sort of a sociable area like Atlanta, Canada, it's like, hey, how's it going? Blah, 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 blah. You don't ultimately actually want an answer to that question, hey, how's it going? But in a way, it is a form that expresses some kind of solidarity. So there are these formulas that are that do that. They're formulas of sociability. That's probably not the textbook definition of it, but you can sort of take that. There's these things that exist that sort of bond us together in these forms. Femic is basically the particular manifestations of them. So, and they're going to kind of associate yourself with a group, like a leave-taking formula. Like, oh, if you got to go, sometimes you just have to sort of announce that you are leaving, and announcing that you are leaving is a perfectly acceptable thing to do. But how do you announce that you are leaving? You say, all right, I got to go. Well, this has been fun. Yeah, well, yeah, and stand up from your chair, or I got to make like a horsecock and hit the road, or I got to, make like a banana and split, or whatever. There are these different formulas, and for a specific, not simply the formula of, well, I have to go, thank you very much, how are you doing? But you choose a particularly apt one because you know that it will express something to your group. And so this idea, whether you want to use the word artistic, whether you want to use the word femic, but that there is a deliberateness in what is being chosen because it communicates not simply the social bond between people, but really it denotes a particular historical reality of that social bond. Like, not only are we important to each other, but we are important to each other in part because we are both participants in this chain of being, in this particular group's history. We are moments in this history, and we are continuing it. That sounds very grandiose, but I think that's kind of what he is talking about when he's talking about Femic. And to me, this is what's really important about the article. I don't know whether this definition has traction. I have started using the word practice in my writing, based in part on this. I don't know if this definition will necessarily catch fire, but it makes me think. And an article that makes you think is an important article, because it makes me think about, A, how limiting earlier definitions may or may not have been. So it makes me sift and go through some kind of purgation of my own tendencies in inertia, in, oh, well, this is what I've been taught, so I'm just going to regurgitate it. And what's more is that, right, there is intent in these things, that there is a deliberateness in doing these things. As I was rereading this today in preparation for making this video, I was trying to think of sort of a glib expression on sort of how to summarize it. And in a way, you could make an argument that folklore, it can be more or less boiled down to, we do this thing because we do this thing. And the doing of this thing is as much about the we as it is about the thing. And I think that there is something there, that when I choose to do something, of all the possible realms that I am doing something, of all the possible choices that I can be doing. I mean, you and I meet somehow. And of all the ways that I can express myself, when I'm expressing myself in the realm of sociability, if I am a surgeon, I am going to be talking to you using the language that is appropriate of surgery because I want precision. But when my primary objective does not have some kind of very technical thing where technical vocabulary is required, but is about the establishment, or just as importantly, the reestablishment of some kind of social contract between us, and that we are present at this moment, the choices that I am making are intelligent choices based on an intelligent, maybe not perfect, but an intelligent understanding of who you are and your relationship to me, and what of our shared, or what I understand of our shared, grammar of being in the world can I employ to not only express whatever instrumental thing I need to express, but also to remind us of that we-ness. So it's not Weenus. That's funny. So it's of the thing itself. It's of the group that you and I are members of. That went into a wonderfully weird direction, but I don't apologize. This is a hard reading. I'm not 100% sure I understand it. There's a distinct possibility that Simon will watch this video and correct me, and I welcome that. I think it's a great reading to wrestle with. Try to wrestle to the ground. You might ultimately end up being pinned by it, and that's okay too. So, this has been your good pal Ian, talking you through, or perhaps in this video, trying to talk you through Simon Bronner's Toward an Understanding of Folklore and Practice. My name is Ian, and as ever, I wish you nothing but the best. Be well, and bye-bye.